All right, so let's walk through step by step this excerpt of the Republic that you just read, in which Socrates and Thrasymachus are tossing around ideas about the nature of justice. And the goal here is not to turn you into a mini Socrates. The goal is for you to understand how Socrates rolled. What was the method that he used to learn about himself and what he knew, and to learn about others and what they knew or didn't know, and to determine for yourself whether or not you think this method could be useful to you in your own life. All right. So, Thrasymachus, a sophist. Socrates, as a general rule, did not dig the sophists because he believed that they were out for power. They were out for money. They were out for fame. They were expressly not out in search of the truth. And Socrates did not dig that at all. So Thrasymachus shows up on the scene of a conversation that Socrates is having with his friends after this religious festival, and they're bandying about, hey, what is justice? I think it's this, I think it's this. And finally, Thrasymachus, who's a bit of a blowhard, he can't take it anymore. And he's like, stands up and he's like, you dopes, you are so overcomplicating this conversation. It's easy to define what justice is. Justice is the interest of the stronger. In other words, might makes right. Okay, so what Thrasymachus is essentially saying is there is no moral definition of justice. There's only power definitions of justice. So this is a question about power, not morality. Because, as a sophist, Thrasymachus would think the things that matter in life are power and fame and money, not things like truth or morality. These, for Thrasymachus, would just be a fiction. So what Thrasymachus is saying is, look, if you want to know what justice is, go to any given society, find the people who are in power, and they'll tell you what justice is. And they're going to define what justice is as whatever works best for them as the people in power. And because they have power, they're going to force that on others. So Thrasymachus is saying the reality is, despite all of your lofty conversations about what justice is, the reality is that wherever you go, the people in power are going to be the ones that use the apparatus of today's world, the media, the education system, Twitter, Google. They're going to use their power to determine what kinds of ideas serve justice, what kind of practices or institutions serve justice, and which ones don't. You can kind of see this argument sort of unfolding in our own culture right now when you think about how much power the media has, the government has, to shape our conversations and our ideas about justice and morality. All right, so Thrasymachus is totally thrown down with might makes right. It's the powerful that define what justice is. There is no universally applicable moral term. Now, we get into the dialectic, this back and forth. That's what dialectic is. It's this back and forth between Socrates and Thrasymachus. And Socrates does the first thing Socrates always does, which is he isolates a key term in his conversation partner's argument, and he frames it back as a question. Now, whether or not you choose to embrace the Socratic method in your life, I would strongly encourage you to at least embrace this first step in the Socratic method. When you're having a discussion with someone, and this discussion is about something that needs a definition, don't proceed in the conversation until you have an agreed upon definition of that term. All right, so you can see Socrates kind of doing this in a lot of dialogues that Plato wrote. So in the Euthyphro, for example, Socrates wants to know, what does it mean to be holy? What does it mean to be pious? What is piety? And so he seeks out somebody who claims to be a very pious, very upright, very holy person named Euthyphro, and asks him, what is piety? In Meno, the question is, you claim to be a virtuous person. What exactly is virtue? What does that term mean? Or in the Sophist, what is meaning? Which is a weird question, but it's an important one. In the Symposium, what is love? You claim you love this person, or you claim to know what love is. What is it? What is love? That's a great dialogue, by the way. And our question here in the Republic, what is justice? What exactly is this thing that we're claiming? Now, I'm telling you to always begin with terms because more often than not, arguments arise and fail to come to any kind of agreed upon conclusion, because the participants in the conversation don't take the time to define the terms that they're using in the argument, and they don't know it, but they're actually arguing about different things. This is really common. I watch it happen all the time. Somebody makes a claim using a term that goes undefined. Somebody immediately responds to that claim without defining that term, and then this argument starts, and the two people don't realize it, but they actually define a critical term in different ways. So they're not actually even having the same argument together. So first step in any argument, we should probably adopt from Socrates. Start by defining terms. I sometimes say to classes that 95% of the legwork in philosophy is carefully defining your terms. All right, so then think about this. Well, what if I'm not involved in some lofty conversation about justice, or morality, or love, or compassion, or beauty? What if I'm just going about my business every day, living my ordinary life, and I'm not involved in these philosophic conversations? Oh, that was a dumb segue, but pay attention to this cartoon because this is funny. So what happens in these dialogues typically with Socrates is he approaches somebody who's very brash and young and claiming to know something and really confident. And then Socrates, through this method, just kind of starts to destroy them a little bit. So you can see in this cartoon, he says, "How wonderful that you know what virtue is and to think you're only 20 years old." All right, so key terms. Think about the conversation that has been floating around the world recently. Putin's war in Ukraine is not justifiable, right? So that's a claim that you hear a lot. Well, what exactly does it mean to say that a war is justifiable or unjustifiable? What are the criteria that we would use to define a justifiable war in order to come to the conclusion that this particular war is in fact an unjustifiable one? And it's probably not going to do us much good to say all war is unjustifiable. There should be no war. Okay. But war has been a human reality. It has been a reality for human beings since their beginning. It is likely to continue because people are jerks. So then we have to come up with this decision. At what point is a war justifiable? And this is an interesting statement because Putin would claim that this isn't even a war that he's waged. He would say that this is just him stabilizing or reclaiming parts of Ukraine that are properly Russian sort of satellites. So we would have two terms here. We would probably have to come to an agreement on what exactly is a war and what exactly makes a war justifiable before we could even determine whether this sentence is true or false. I've been thinking about this statement a lot. I have a presentation coming up, and the question is higher education still valuable? All right, well, I can pretty easily define higher education as it's relevant to me, but geez, what does it mean to say that something like higher education or any other kind of pursuit is valuable? What determines its value? Is it associated with monetary value? Or is it something about the ways that a person might change as a result of higher education? Or is the value of higher education associated with some benefit to society? Patrick's a good student. What's the key term there? Yes, good student. What exactly makes a good student? Somebody who gets good grades? Or somebody who has an attitude? I had a student recently, he said, "I don't want any degrees. I just want to learn." Is that a good student? Pliny the Younger is the best IPA. All right. So if you don't know what Pliny the Younger is, it's a beer that Russian River makes. Russian River Brewery down in Windsor or Santa Rosa makes. So you might be dismissing this saying, "Oh, no, that's just subjective. That's just about taste." Well, brewers would disagree. And they would even say, well, what exactly is an IPA? When does a pale ale become an IPA? And when does a IPA become a double IPA or a triple IPA? And then if we're going to go to a contest, as I have a friend who recently does, a home brewing contest, and he enters something into the IPA class, it has to be judged by particular criteria. It's not just a bunch of folks sitting around saying, like, which one tastes best. They're sitting around saying, here are the criteria that we have determined define an IPA, and now we are to apply those criteria, that definition of best IPA, to these individual entries to see which one of these, in fact, earns the title and eventually gets award for best IPA. I'll give you sort of a funny example and then finish up here. A couple of years ago at Redwood Curtain Brewing in Arcadia, you'd walk through the door and there was a big water jug, so you could get up and get a glass of water if you wanted to. And one day I was sitting at a table doing some work, and a person came through the door and went up to the bartender, or beer tender, I think they call themselves, and said, "Hey, I like Coors Light. Which of the beers, what would I like that you guys have here? I'm a Coors Light person. Which would you have?" And she, without skipping a beat, pointed to that water jug and said, "It's right over there." Right? So you can see in her mind, there's things that are beer, and then there's things that are not. And for her, because, it's a she craft brewery, Coors Light did not fit into her definition of beer. It was more closely allied with water. Okay, enough beer talk for me. All right, so that's where we are on step 1 of the Socratic method. Isolate that key term and don't budge in the conversation until your conversation partner has agreed with you on a definition of that critical term.